Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Krymkat and I'm happy as per usual to be sharing with you wisdom about relationships, dating, marriage if you may, and I'm very excited to be back on this podcast. So today we're going to be talking about something I feel like is very important, something I think is incredibly misunderstood sometimes and misconstrued. You know, the conversation of boundaries, especially in the kind of society I am from. I am Nigerian. When you start to have such kind of conversations, it's almost always like as if you're bringing in something that is alien, something that's not needed. But then I disagree. Any relationship you love, any relationship you would like to preserve, you're going to make a good deal of work to ensure that you have boundaries in place in that relationship. And that's what this entire conversation is about today. What are boundaries? Let's get into it. I'll read the definition that I have created, and I like this definition because the components of this definition are things that are very important when the conversation of boundaries come up. And I can say this definition is original to myself. So, what are boundaries? Boundaries are clear definitions of how you would like to relate with a person and what is termed acceptable or not acceptable in the context of that relationship. They differ in terms of the kind of relationship and access people have to you. Did you hear that? They are clearly defined, clear definitions of how you would like to relate to a person. So a boundary is not something that you have that nobody is really clear on or nobody really knows or you are not even clear on yourself. It's a clear definition. It's clearly spelled out and it's communicated. So it's a clear definition of what is termed acceptable and what is not in the context of a relationship with someone that you have, right? And this defines how they would communicate with you, the kind of access that they have to you, and all of that. So that is exactly what boundaries are. If you look at that definition, another thing I really spell out is that these boundaries depend on the kind of relationship. And oftentimes, I always say relationships are a spectrum of access. Maybe not oftentimes, but relationships are a spectrum of access. So the most intimate relationships you have are that intimate because of the dimension of access that the people in those relationships have to you. Other relationships that are not quite intimate is also based off of the fact of the kind of access those people have to you. So if you do not have close access, there is no borderless to an extent access, then it limits, you see, um the kind of relationship you would describe that as. You might call it an acquaintance, not necessarily a friend. And then you come down to even a romantic partner. It's a function of access, and all of this access is defined by boundaries. You see, so that's what boundaries are. It's setting a clear definition of the terms and conditions of how a relationship is going to be. And when we get down to example of boundaries, I'm sure it's going to be less technical. I say this so that sometimes we can get the basics about what a thing is, right? And so it can sound like as in this girl's being too technical about the way she's introducing this thing, but then it's just so we can have certain basics in our mind and we can know that okay, I can't call this a boundary if I've not clearly spelled it out to this person that this is how I would like to be treated or this is how I wouldn't like to be treated. I was creating this, it just really occurred to me, and I think within the context of a particular conversation I was having last week with my colleague at work, it just clicked to me that oftentimes we do not really put it that way, but boundaries are a function of our value systems. So the value systems that you have inform your kind of boundaries. You can say, oh, this is my own boundary. For example, I have a value system where I do not speak vulgar languages to people. I do not use foul words. I do not curse. And you will now set a boundary in your relationship. Automatically, that becomes a boundary because whenever you're going to relate with anybody, you would not appreciate people cursing at you. You will not appreciate people using foul language at you. Where you wouldn't use those kind of language at them, you expect that they wouldn't use that kind of language at you. So that is an example of how your values are informing or you're shaping your boundaries. So if you are not able to clearly spell out your values, and everybody has a value system, everybody has a value system. Even if you've not sat down to intentionally create your own value system, you got handed it down, maybe by culture by the family that raised you. You got some value systems. There are things that you believe, there are things that you stand by, there are things that if somebody does to you, you'll be like, I don't agree with that. It's based on the kind of internal value system that you have. So you need to clearly sit down and understand, what are my value systems, what are the things that I want to live my life by. For some people, telling a lie is not so much of a big deal, but for some other person whose value system is truth and honesty, it's so much of a big deal, because why would you lie? You see. So when you're able to spell out that as a value system, that lies are not tolerated in the context of my relationship with you. If you feel like you can lie, it will erode trust, and when trust is not there, my ability to be vulnerable in relationship is severely impaired, and I cannot, move forward with this relationship when there's a consistent train and of telling lies. So you have to be able to understand that when you're setting boundaries, it is not going to be you just putting big fences around yourself so that nobody hurts you. Boundaries are a reflection of your internal value system in the context of the people you relate with. So it's a reflection of who you are inside. If you have not established what your value system is, it's going to be difficult to establish what you would call an ideal boundary for yourself, especially in the context of a romantic relationship. So the first thing that we've said is what boundaries are. The second thing that I've established is the fact that your values inform and they shape your boundaries. They are not antithetical, they are not separate. Your boundaries are just a reflection of who you are and how you would rather be treated in the context of any relationship, you see. Now, the next question I'd like to answer is, should romantic relationships have boundaries? I'm going to start from what I said in the beginning, and that is, any relationship you want to protect, you're going to have to put a boundary around it. Because let me give you an example. If, for say, you hate something, you hate people, you have a pet peeve, and you don't communicate that pet peeve, you don't put a boundary around it and say, see, I hate it so much when people lie and they don't take responsibility for something that they have done. It really affects my ability to relate with them. And I don't want a situation in the context of our relationship where you don't take responsibility for what you've done or you lie, you see. If you don't communicate it, that person would continue to do it. And the more they do it, the more they hurt you, the more they push you. And you get to a point of resentment where you can no longer ignore what they have done. And rather than have a relationship where it's fixed, you're going to actually just walk away. You see. So that is one of the main, will I say, cocoa in the way we say in Nigeria, of why having boundaries saves your relationship. So if you have a romantic relationship, your ability to set boundaries and not assume your partner knows what they shouldn't or shouldn't do. No, be able to sit down and set clear boundaries. So, oh, I'm uncomfortable, if you're having this kind of relationship with people of the opposite sex. I know you would have friends, but when it starts to get to this level, I'm super uncomfortable. Be able to communicate that and set boundaries actively around them, because if you're not able to do that, your partner might just assume that, oh, you don't have a problem with it. And when you start to now show certain levels of disappointment and anger, everyone's like, where's that coming from? So you see, this is very important for us to be able to establish. So if you have a relationship you want to keep, you have a relationship you want to preserve, you have a relationship you want to save, you see, you want to go ahead and set boundaries around that relationship. The next thing I'd like to talk about is that with changing dynamics of a relationship come changing boundaries. And let me explain that. The kind of boundaries you had when you were dating are not necessarily the same kind of boundaries you would have when you were married. Yes. So you cannot say, oh, but I did this when we were dating, you never complained. Now we are married and you say you really like me not to do this. That's because it's a different kind of relationship. Even though it's with the same person, it's a different kind of commitment. So when you have a relationship with a person and the dynamics change in terms of commitment, from dating to engaged, from engaged to married, from dating to married, from courting to married, it is okay and actually expected that the dynamics of your boundaries will change. So if you don't understand that, if you don't kind of expect that and embrace that, you might start to fight things that shouldn't be fought. expect that when your dynamics of relationship change, when your commitment strata changes, you're going to actually have a different kind of relationship, you see. And based off of that, you're going to have new kind of boundaries. So changing boundaries in different contexts or different spectrums of commitment as per new kind of relationship is not a weird thing, it's not a strange thing, it's actually expected. And that is one thing we must establish. Now, I think we can go into some examples of boundaries so that we are clear on what I'm talking about and you kind of have an idea of what these things are, so that we're not just saying, oh, boundaries, 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 and you're like, what exactly is this girl talking about? Let's talk about some boundaries. One is physical boundaries. I think this is so important and people underestimate it, especially when they're in romantic relationships. They feel like, oh, anything goes. And I feel like there is this idea that everybody is doing what you're doing. And I think that is very wrong. Everybody's not doing what you're doing, oh. We're not all alike, oh. We don't all have the same value systems, oh. Not everybody, which I think is even something that should a conversation that should come up before any committed relationship. Not everybody is having sex before marriage. Yes, not everybody is okay with getting physical in the context of a dating relationship. And when they clearly communicate that, if you don't believe the same thing, I think that it is more than important that you actually discontinue the progress of that relationship. Rather than come into that relationship and consistently disrespect their boundaries. There are people that agree that, okay, ah, I'm okay and I'm good with like you just, you know, being physical in a casual or in a courtship or in a dating relationship. But there are some other people that do not believe so. And they have boundaries around that, you see. They would not appreciate being touched in a certain way. They don't want this. So it's very funny, and it's not just funny, it's also annoying when you're now seeing that, oh, I have communicated my boundaries, communicated my own personal beliefs and my goals, and I have put boundaries around them, and you are consistently trying to break those boundaries. Like, why did you come in the first place? Just go away from the relationship. Why are you here? So it's very important that you respect people's boundaries. When they put boundaries, you respect them. Even in the context of a marriage, there are some kind of things that people do not appreciate happening in public. There's a way some women will not appreciate you touching them in public. There's a way some men will not appreciate PDA in public. And I think it should be respected. So there are boundaries. And so when you're not doing something that you know your partner doesn't like, and you persist at doing that thing, and they are reacting very, negatively, very strongly, and you're like, what is it now? They simply don't like it and they've told you. So why are you still doing it? You see? So I think it's very important for us to be able to establish these truths and hold them to be so. If somebody does not like something and has communicated them clearly, I think they should be respected, you see. So there are boundaries that are physical and they should be respected. Boundaries that are physical in marriage, boundaries that are physical in courting relationships or engaged people relationships, and it should be respected. The second thing I'd like to talk about that's actually getting very big in our generation is actually language. And I think this is even actually a screener. Yeah, it kind of tells you the kind of people you can date or cannot date. So if somebody is using a certain kind of language that for you is, prohibited, it's terrible, you can never, never accept it, why are you even trying to struggle to be there in the first place? Why not be going? So when somebody says, I would rather not have you speak to me that way or in that tone, it's a boundary. Actually, when you see that this person intentionally tries to reciprocate what they are telling you, so it's not just them saying, oh, don't speak to me that way. They actually don't speak to you that way. And that's how I am. So if there's a certain kind of thing I don't appreciate people doing to me, I ensure I don't do it to them so that I am communicating by my actions. I don't like this thing. I don't do it to you. Don't do it to me. You see. So it's very, very important for us to be able to establish this. It will help us to understand how to deal and to manage our relationships in a way that is healthy. If your partner does not like you joking insulting me. There's this thing that's going on in Nigeria. People just laugh and say, haha, you're a fool. I'm like, who is a fool? Who does that? Who speaks like that? You see. So there's no form of joke that comes out vulgar and your partner clearly communicates that they do not appreciate, that you should continue to do. It's common sense. So very firstly and very importantly, in the terms of language, I think that there's a kind of language barrier that is even in place that I think the relationship should not even move forward with. You see, a relationship should not exist if you are at a certain point, because your language is actually a reflection of your intellectual level and a reflection of the kind of value system you've come to have and you've come to build. So if you're actually now struggling to do basic things and say or not use basic kind of curse languages, I think that's a big red flag sometimes and you should even move forward. You see. The third thing, which is a big thing, is social and interrelationship boundaries. And in the context of a romantic relationship, this is big because this is where you have to talk about relationships with the other sex, relationship with friends, and even relationship with already existing, let's say, besties that are not even the opposite sex. You see. So you want to have those conversations around what you feel comfortable and what you feel don't feel comfortable with. And this is very important, especially in the context of assumptions. Don't assume your partner knows not to do something to you. Clearly explain or communicate what you expect and what you don't expect to experience because you're in a relationship with them. You see. So social and interrelationship boundaries are very important. What are the relationship boundaries that we have with other people? What happens that we cannot go and talk to other people about? What are the things that we cannot say to friends? What are the things that we can say to only mentors? What are the things that we cannot say to our family members? You have to establish all these dynamics. What's the boundary line of getting our friends involved in our business? What is the boundary line of saying you can't go further, you cannot come further? You need to be able to establish all of these things. And if you're not able to do that, can be a problem, a big problem, as in a huge problem, you see. So I'm going to talk more about this point on my next video. I want to bring it to an end now because I think the video has gone on for a while. I hope you enjoyed it. I would continue the conversation on boundaries, examples of boundaries, and then go ahead to talk about how to maintain boundaries in a relationship. And I'm really looking forward to it. Please make sure you subscribe, you share, you like, share this with someone, and we'll continue the conversation on boundaries on the next one. This is me leaving you with love and light. Bye.